Here it is. So in the last class, I think you're aware of what we discussed and what was, thought in the last class, right? So, so Uri Miller's experiment was the last thing that we studied, like how the life evolved and how the life could have started. So that is, uh, yeah, this was the last thing that we studied, right? So today we're going to study evidences for evolution and well, see, to believe that evolution has occurred, we have to rely on some of the sources that give us an idea that it has really happened. So here are some of the ways in which we can tell that evolution really happened. If otherwise, it would be just a hypothesis or somebody's prediction or somebody's imagination. So some of the evidences that we have come across might be physical evidences or or any chemical evidences, or you can see some of the evidences might be theoretical. So all these evidences are compiled together, and we can see that there is a connection between each other's views. Okay, so the first one is paleontological evidences, morphological and anatomical evidences, biogeographical evidences like adaptive radiance. Then we have is biochemical evidences, embryological evidences, and evidences from evolution by natural selection. So we'll see each of them, and we'll try to understand how much of value they are to understand about evolution. So paleontological evidences are quite famous. Why? Because we are very much fascinated by the fossils, or we might not know nothing much about the fossils, but we are very much aware about fossils with the movies like Jurassic Park or something like that. So if you look at them, they show these huge museums with a lot of bones and a lot of skulls, and which is like completely giant animals, their skeletals and everything. So they are not like something that we see today, or any animal that we see today. Nothing resembles them. So they should be existing some millions of years ago. So paleontology is a study of fossils, and fossils are the remnants of life forms that are found in the rock. So for the formation of fossils, how the fossils are formed and how the fossils actually, become present. It's like, for example, if you have, uh, let's say that you have an animal, and the animal, if it directly gets trapped in the molten lava or without any air, okay, so there is an animal, and suddenly it fell into, or a large amount of lava fell on it, and there was no air, and entire tissues burn up, and its bones gets petrified. Okay, we call it as petrification. So one example I can give you is in one of the geology exhibitions I had gone. So there were like some rocks. So my friend pointed me to this rock and asked me what it is. So when I picked it up, it was so heavy. It was really heavy. And I said, it's just a rock. So there is nothing special about it. And he said that these rocks are not normal rocks. These are dinosaur eggs. Okay, there's the eggs of dinosaurs, which are found in, I think, Gujarat or Rajasthan region. Even in India, they were found. So I was like really shocked. I expected the dinosaur eggs to be, covered in the, covered in the stones. And then when you cut it, you can see the egg-like features. No, not really like that. So they are called as petrification. Petrification means they look like rocks. They're petrified because of the hot lava. Now they don't degrade. Instead, they turn into this solid rock-like material. And usually they use this dinosaur eggs in some of these parts of our country to make chutney or to smash some tomatoes or garlic, etc. Okay, so that's the story. So similarly, so in paleontology, like when you study fossil records, you can understand how some of the organisms evolved. For example, the evolutionary history of horse, or it can be a connecting link between two different organisms, the relationship between a bird and a reptile, like you have this Archaeopteros, right? So this particular bird is a connecting link between a reptile and a birds. So similarly, you can come across some of the animals which resemble both two different groups. For example, you can say fishes. Between fishes and reptiles, there are amphibians. Now, or amphibians are there. So amphibians resembles both aquatic animals as well as terrestrial animals. So they become like a connecting link. So studying these fossil records, they give us a connecting link between two different groups of animals. or organisms. And then you also come across this extinct organisms like dinosaurs, which is a very solid proof that life was not the same that we see today. So life was very different, and the animals were different, that they lived in an extremely different environmental conditions. And they were quite different morphologically, anatomically, and physiologically, right? You can understand that it is not the same as we see today, right? And then it also gives us an idea about the geological period. See, analyzing the fossils through carbon dating, you usually do the perform the carbon dating and analyze the age of the fossil. So when you analyze the age of the fossil, it really gives us shocking information that the life is not just how we see, like 1,000 years or 10,000 years. It goes back to millions of years. So some of the fossil records, oldest fossil records, goes hundreds of millions years ago. So that gives us a very okay, excuse me, a broad and shocking timeline to even measure. So we can think about how much of life would have evolved. What is carbon dating? So basically, what happens is, let's say that there is a bone, and this bone was particularly buried or it got fossilized some millions of years ago. Now, carbon has what do you say? Let's say the carbon has this atomic number or atomic mass. So let's say that it has an atomic mass of 12, 8, yeah, 8. So now what happens is, if the carbon has to lose its isotopic form, for example, if it has to become from carbon 14 to carbon 12, for it to lose these two protons, okay, so it has to undergo this decay, okay. So it undergoes this decay. It happens with every element, but usually radioactive elements are the ones that it goes into this radioactive decay, and it gets this half life. So uranium becomes thorium. So this decay will take a certain amount of time naturally. So when you see some of the trapped elements within this fossilized bones or any remnants, when you analyze the carbon, the type of carbon and the atomic mass of this carbon, it would have been having a certain mass compared to that of the atmospheric carbon that we see. It would have a different type of a carbon with a different atomic mass. So that will give us an idea how old or how long it would have taken this carbon to undergo this decay to achieve that particular mass. So when we analyze this, it will give us a very accurate date on how old the fossil might be. Did you understand this? So that's called as carbon dating. Okay. So you just understand the atomic decay, and you give a timeline to it. How long would it take to lose certain mass of that particular atom? Okay, so that is called as carbon dating. So when you do that, it will give us a uh, very shocking geological timeline. And with this each timeline, you can see and you can also predict what might be the conditions of Earth back then. Is it the same as today, or is it quite different? Which is very different. See, actually, it is very different than what we see today. Okay, so it gives us an idea. Important evidence. Okay, and it has become one of the key evidences for the scientific community to come and argue that the evolution took place and the organisms are not the same as we see today, and there's a huge shift in the biological evolution. Okay, so next one is morphological and anatomical evidences. So this is something very visible to what we see today. What is morphology and what is anatomical evidences? When you see the group of animals which are not quite related, like if I compare myself with a whale, I might not see a very visible similarity. But if I look at the anatomical parts and if I look at the morphological parts, some of the morphological or anatomical parts, we might come across some of the commonness. So among the morphological and anatomical evidences, we can come across two different organs. One is homologous organs, other one is called as analogous organs. Divergence and there is something called as convergence. So let's say that we have an organism, and the organisms, let's say we have a limbs of a human, okay, and then we have the four limbs of cheetah, okay, and then you have the four wings of the bat, the flippers of whale. All of them are four limbs only. But the use of these parts are quite different. Okay, so we have the same structure, like we have the radius, ulna, and then you have carpels, metacarpals, phalanges. The structures are very, very similar, but the function is very different from each other. Okay, our hands perform a different function compared to that of the cheetah's hands. Cheetah's forelimbs, they are supposed to be grabbing and they're supposed to be running. So that's their function. They don't have digits like us where we do the writing, grabbing, or fisting, etc. Or you can see that in the whales also, the forelimbs of the whales, they act like flippers. So they are not the same. Like a bat, the forelimbs of the bat is completely modified to wings. Okay. So here, what happens is, even though we have the same structure, but our functions as diverge. So this kind of evolution is called as divergent evolution. Remember, homologous organs are the examples of what? It is an example of divergent, sorry, yeah, divergent evolution. So what is divergent? You start at one point, we all have the same structure, but our functions are quite different. For different functions, we have modified these organs or we have modified this part to suit that behavior or to suit that demand. Okay, so this is called as homology. Homology's examples can be human hands and cheetah's foot can be the example for that. And then you have your other structures such as anatomical structures of bones. We have the same structure, right? And homology can also be seen in heart and brain. Okay, so we have the same structure, but we can perform different functions. Like what? The if you see the birds can see far better than us. That means their optic lobes are more evolved than us. Like if you take snakes, the snake smelling sense is far more greater than us. So they have these Jacobson's organs, which are modified parts of brain that help them to see through the smell. Okay, so you can see the different adaptive features of your different animals, right? For example, if you see bats have a tremendous development in their temporal lobes. So they pick up these sound waves very significantly and form a pictures even in darkness. They're able to see in the dark, right? So like that, the brain is same, but they're adapted to different functions, similar to that of the heart also. Okay. Homologous organs can also be found in plants, for example, thorns and tendrils of bougainvillea and cucurbita. See, if you see the thorns and tendrils, they are the same structures, okay? But they have modified them. See, they have modified themselves into either thorn or tendril, okay? So the thorns actually protect the plant and the tendril actually helps in structural support. But if you see what are these parts, they are nothing but the same modifications, okay? The leaf modifications of a stem, okay? So this is the homology. So remember the examples, okay? Next one. Homologous organs are, as I told you, it is the example of a divergent evolution. And divergent evolutions, actually what happens, the species, whichever the organisms you have, they become less similar. Like as I told you, if you compare the hands of human beings and the whales, you don't see much of similarity. But as they diverge, they become quite less similar. So that is what is the significance of divergence. When you diverge, you need not become more similarity. You should have less similarity. Okay, so different environmental conditions. Okay, next one is analogous organs. In analogous organs, what happens? We saw in homologous organs that we all have the same structure, but we perform different functions by modifications in organs. Correct? No. So this is called as divergence. What is convergence? All of us are, see, for example, you are coming from different regions, like you are having completely different structure, but your motto is to perform same function. Okay, different structures are modified to perform same function. You converge to a point, you tend to become more similar. For example, if you compare the wings of a butterfly and wings of a bat or a bird, you might think that the wings of a butterfly and the wings of the bird is same, but it is not at all same. The wings of a butterfly is completely a different organ and it is made up of different structures, whereas the wings of a bird is completely different structure, but they look very, very similar and they perform a very similar function. Okay, so this is called as analogy. Analogy is a convergent evolution. Okay, So where you have different structure perform the same function. As I told you, the wings of the insects is made up of chitin, okay, which is a protein. Whereas the wings of the birds is made up of modified forelimbs. That means they have this radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, etc. You don't find bones in your butterflies, right? Similarly, if you see the eye of an octopus, eye of an octopus is modified. I mean, like the eye comes from the skin, whereas our mammals get the eyes from the embryonic brain. Our eye comes from the brain. Okay, our eye emerges from the brain tissue, whereas the eye of an octopus emerges from the skin tissue. Even though they are two different structures, but they perform the same function. That means they both are modified to see. Okay, this is also one example for analogy. Flippers of penguins and dolphins. So flippers of penguin, they help in flapping. They are also completely different structure, but they perform the same function. Okay. Next comes the sweet potato and the potato. The sweet potato is a modified root and the potato is a modified stem, but both of them perform the same function. That is the storage of food. Okay. Next one. You have the trachea of insects and then you have the lung of vertebrates. The trachea of insects is a very, very different structure. What is the trachea of an insect? These are nothing but tube-like structures. You have the insect body, and in the insect body, you have the proper network of small holes. Okay, so these holes lead to a tubular network called as trachea, which further mix up with the blood vessels. So the air exchange happens through this trachea, and then the blood gets the oxygen exchange with this tracheary network. Okay, so it is a completely different structure. Look at our respiratory system. We have so many different or complex organs, but the trachea of insects also perform the same function, and the lungs and the respiratory system of humans also perform the same function. Okay, so you can see that the trachea is of a derivative of ectoderm, whereas the lungs of a vertebrate is a derivative of endoderm. If you don't know what is ectoderm and endoderm, go back to the basics that you studied in your +1 in animal kingdom. If you look at the embryonic layers, you have ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm. No, so ectoderm is one of the outermost layer. Endoderm is the innermost layer. Mesoderm is the middle layer. So we are triploblastic organisms. So we know that these embryonic layers will give rise to different parts as it develops into babies. Okay. So now what happened? You have your ectoderm. Ectoderm derivative is the trachea. Endoderm derivative is the lung. Even though there are two different structures, but they perform the same function. This is another example for analogy. Got it, no? So next evidence is biochemical evidences. Remember, when it comes to morphological and anatomical evidences, they will definitely ask you about 100% one question will come from what is homology and what is analogy, either in the form of examples. They might give you examples like the thorns of bougainvillea as well as tendrils of cucurbita are the example of what. So then you have your answer should be already. Okay. Similarly, they can ask the flippers of penguin and the flippers of dolphin are an example of what. So please remember the examples for that particular topic. Okay. What is homologous organs? What is analogous organs? And how do you differentiate between them? Okay. Next one is biochemical evidences. So when we are studying about genetic code, okay, we understood that one of the statements that we say when we see there are like 6 statements, no, to study about properties of genetic code. So among them, you study that the genetic code is universal, correct, right? So the genetic code is universal. So from bacteria to human beings, all of us have the same genetic code. Similarly, if you see the same thing, like from bacteria to all the way till the complex eukaryotes, our biochemistry is also quite similar. Like what? We are made up of proteins, we have genes, and our genes can be either DNA. Okay, most of us is made up of DNA, and the DNA or the RNA, and then RNA gives rise to proteins, the central dogma. Okay, and how the things function like glycolysis process. Okay, and then anaerobic processes or the lipid metabolism is quite similar to most of us. Okay, so the another one very important evidence comes is biochemistry. Like if you take the DNA of a bacteria and compare it to that of humans, all of us is made up of the same nucleotides. Like all of us have the same thing, like adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine. If you take the RNA of bacteria and human and compare, will be made up of the same nucleotides again, like adenine, uracil, cytosine, and guanine. If you take the proteins, we are made up of the same type of amino acids. Okay, like like you have the 20 amino acids, right? So these amino acids, they actually make up the proteins. So biochemically, we are very much related to each other. So it becomes a very important, very important key evidences for the what do you tell for the evolution. Okay. Next one is adaptive radiance. Actually, Shaheen, it's raining. I don't know how far we have the network. Let's find it out. Okay. Are you able to understand, Shaheen? Is it very fast? Are you here? Are you able to understand? Do you have any doubts till now? Okay. Uh, as you tell you, as you type, I'll just move on. Okay. Next one is biogeographical evidences, where the best example is adaptive variance. Okay. Now imagine to understand adaptive variance, and actually Darwin's idea, I mean, like Darwin's experiences gave us this idea about adaptive variance. Let's imagine we have one proper country, and among this proper country, so let's take we have India. Okay, and one of the parts of India, let's say it breaks, and then it drifts away in the ocean. Okay, it goes away in the ocean like an island. What does it, how does it affect these organisms who are living that island? So for those organisms, the life becomes quite limited. How? They, whatever the food that is present, that is the ultimate source of the food. Correct, right? So that is the ultimate. They won't get any other source from any outside. So they have to live what is left on that island. So if all the organisms that are present on that particular island depended on only one source of food, they all depended on one source of food, would life be possible for them to continue forever? No, right? There would be excessive competition, and all the resources would get exhausted in a very short amount of time, and that would lead to extinction of these organisms. I'm not telling that immediately they'll start adapting, but slowly and gradually they have to look for other sources of food. So since it's an island, now some of the birds they might go in hunting of insects, some might eat grains, some might eat plants and plant products, some might go and hunt for fish, some might go and hunt for crabs or etc. So their food habits vary. When their food habits vary, obviously they would start to develop some senses, develop some parts, and make them more stronger and more exceptional in finding their food, right? And in trying to change, they have to change. If you're eating only grains, that means your metabolism have to change. If you're hunting insects, you have to need hunting organs like the sharper beaks, the sharper claws, okay, sharper eyes, etc. Similarly, that's what happens in adaptive radiance. If they're all belonging to the same family and the same species, if they are isolated, okay, and there is a limited source of food, now what these organisms will do is they will try to adapt to different food conditions, different environmental conditions, and different challenges. When they start adapting, when a group of organisms starts adapting to certain conditions, now what happens? They start developing different structures. Like you can see here, an insect-eating finch to a seed-eating finch, okay, to a plant-eating finch. They're all the same family, but their beaks, their shape of the face, their eyesight have modified over a period of time because their habits changed, okay, due to the isolation. So this is called as adaptive radiance. That means you start at one point, you're all belonging to the same group, but you start adapting to different conditions because of the lack of resources. When you start doing that, now what will happen? You will turn out to be a different species. Okay, you will finally end up becoming a different species as the time passes. So this is called as adaptive radiance. And another example is the marsupials of Australia. See, if you see Australia, Australia is like a very big island. So Australia is before it was a part of Asia, I think, and then it broke up, and then it started drifting away somewhere nowhere in the ocean. So Australia is like a big island. Now here also the same problem happened. That means a group of organisms were isolated from the mainland. So once they were isolated, their resource became limited. So the animals that are found in Australia, they're not found in anywhere on the planet. They're extremely different organisms. Uh, you have everything, like every step you take, there is something that can kill you in Australia. From the most toxic snakes to most poisonous octopus to most poisonous spiders. It's a very different planet. Australia is a very different planet. So if you look at Australia, and what happens in Australia is the same thing. You can see the mammals. Some of the mammals who are like relatives, you can see here, the mole, the anteater, the mouse, the lemur, the flying squirrel, the bobcat, the wolf, they were all found in the mainland. Like these are the placental animals. So they were like this in Australia. But as the time passed, they started becoming radiate. That means they adapted to Australian conditions. They became different organisms like marsupial mole, okay, numbat, that is an anteater, marsupial mouse, spotted cuscus, flying phalanger, Tasmanian tiger cat, Tasmanian wolf. So all these modifications took place. You can see in the pictures clearly that they look alike, but their features are not same. Okay, so they are. This is how they were. This is how they were in the mainland. But once they started evolving in Australia, they became completely different organisms. You can see here they have evolved into a completely different conditions. So they are not the same as this. See, you cannot tell that this mole and the Australia, marsupial mole is similar. They're never similar, but they have completely changed their behavior, their morphology, their anatomy, and their structures. Uh, and they did this because of the new conditions, and they have turned out to become a new species. So this is called as adaptive variance. Okay, so this is, hold on, and now we have to go for the other topic. And before we go for the other topic, just give me 1 second. Yeah.